My name is Maren Holloway. The night I thought I'd finally be recognized for 5 years of loyalty, my boss gave the promotion to a woman who'd been there 3 months. I clapped like everyone else, outside. Inside, something shattered. That was the moment I stopped being quiet. I chose dignity over permission. If you've ever stayed somewhere too long, listen to the full story. Then tell me in the comments, was I right to walk away? What would you have done? I'm still listening. It was supposed to be my night. Or at least, that's what everyone thought, even me. They had balloons taped to the break room windows. Gold foil ones, spelling out growth in uneven letters. I remember standing near the fruit tray, holding a glass of lukewarm champagne and telling myself not to expect anything, even though everyone else already had. "You're the one tonight, right?" Someone whispered behind me. Another voice chimed in. "You carried the whole Alpha project, let's be honest." I smiled, nodded, sipped slowly, even though the bubbles scratched my throat. The truth is, I let myself believe them. Not because I needed the spotlight, but because I'd earned it. 5 years of consistency, grace under pressure, carrying messes others left behind, and making them look polished in front of clients. The celebration was called an Internal Growth Recognition event. A name that felt stiff, corporate, just vague enough to cover any surprise. But everyone knew what it meant. A promotion was coming. And for weeks, whispers had circled like bees around a jar of open sugar. When Elliot finally walked in, 10 minutes late, wearing that perfectly pressed navy suit, everyone made space like Moses parting the Red Sea. He moved slowly, as if time waited for him. His eyes scanned the room, pausing on me for a half-second longer than anyone else. I took that half-second and folded it into hope. Elliot had always been composed, measured. Every compliment from him felt rehearsed, like it had passed through legal before reaching your ears. But people trusted him. Maybe because he never raised his voice. Maybe because he always made you feel like you owed him something. He tapped his glass gently, just once. The room quieted like a stage breath. "Let's raise a glass," he began. "To leadership. To fresh vision. To impact that doesn't just sustain but inspires." I held my breath. I didn't look at anyone. My fingers tightened slightly around the glass stem. And let's welcome someone new into a role that demands both creativity and courage. Someone who's shown, very quickly, that she's ready to lead. I blinked. He turned, extended his arms slightly, and smiled that diplomatic smile. "Tessero." For a second, the room froze. Then the clapping started.
Loud. Quick.
Confused even. I heard someone exhale behind me before joining in. And then I felt it, my own hands. They moved on their own. Mechanical. I clapped too. Because what else was I supposed to do? My hands moved because they were supposed to. But my chest felt like it was made of stone. Tessa stepped forward. She looked surprised. Or maybe she was just pretending well. Her voice trembled as she said something about honor and team spirit and continuing the legacy. The words floated around me like static. None of it landed. People patted my back, some avoiding eye contact altogether. I nodded, smiled, played the role. I was good at that. Too good, maybe. When the toast was done, I set my glass down and walked toward the hallway. Not far, just enough to get a sip of water and catch my breath. The coolness of the hallway hit me like a curtain of reality. I let my shoulders fall for the first time that night. That's when I heard his footsteps behind me. Elliot didn't rush. He always walked like nothing ever surprised him. I turned, and there he was, holding a half-empty glass and wearing a look that was almost kind. Almost. He leaned in slightly, voice low and smooth like velvet that hides a blade. "Let this be a lesson in humility," he said. "You never stop learning, Maren." And just like that, everything inside me shifted. It wasn't disappointment. Not exactly. It was clarity. I watched him turn and walk back into the celebration. The clapping had faded. Only the soft hum of casual conversation remained. I stood there, in the doorway between a room full of people and a future I hadn't yet named. That was the night they clapped. And I finally heard the silence behind it. The morning after the party felt colder than it should have. Not in temperature, but in the kind of way your skin prickles even when the sun is up. I sat at the edge of my bed, fully dressed, shoes on, staring at the wall like I'd forgotten how to move. There was still a faint smell of champagne on my coat, even though I hadn't finished the glass. I hadn't really spoken to anyone after the announcement. I remember smiling, wide enough to be convincing, but not deep enough to be real. People had hugged me anyway, clapped me on the back, said vague things like, "You're next," or "You're such a team player." I nodded. I was polite. I didn't trust myself to speak. Now, in the quiet of my apartment, I couldn't stop thinking about the moment Elliot leaned in. "Let this be a lesson in humility," he said. "You never stop learning." I replayed that line over and over, like a song you don't like, but can't skip. And then came the other questions, the ones that crawled into the corners of my thoughts. Did I miss the signs? Did I fool myself? Had I made too much of small compliments? Had I mistaken professionalism for trust? I was still sitting there, thoughts tangled in that loop, when my phone buzzed. "Wesley, coffee this morning?" I didn't answer right away. I stared at the message for a good 2 minutes before typing. "Maple Oak." He replied instantly. "Already here." By the time I got there, Wesley was halfway through a cinnamon roll and reading something on his phone. He looked up when I walked in, gave me a smile that wasn't pitying, just grounded. "You look like someone who didn't sleep," he said. Didn't feel like I earned it. I ordered my usual, black coffee, no sugar, and sat across from him. For a few seconds, we didn't speak. The cafe was quiet, as it usually was on weekday mornings. The sound of spoons against ceramic and the low hum of indie music filled the space between us. He broke the silence. "So, the party." I let out something between a sigh and a laugh. "Yeah, that." He tilted his head. "I heard." "From who?" "I still have friends in that building, Maren. People talk." I sipped my coffee. "Of course they do." "You were never going to get that job," he said flatly. "Elliot's been priming Tessa since her first week." It didn't sting as much as I expected. In fact, hearing it out loud brought a strange kind of relief. Like having a suspicion confirmed so you can finally stop wondering. "I had a feeling," I admitted. Wesley nodded slowly. He needed someone shiny. Someone easy to mold. "You were never easy to mold." "I was never hard to work with." "No, you weren't. But you're clear. You ask questions. You hold the line when something doesn't sit right. And Elliot doesn't like being challenged, even when it's done respectfully." I stared at the wood grain on the table, tracing a knot with my fingertip. I thought about all the meetings where Tessa spoke up just long enough to be noticed, but never long enough to push back. The compliments Elliot threw her way, even when she barely contributed. The way he always circled back to her after the rest of us had left the room. "You think he planned it all along?" I asked. "I think he decided quickly, and then made sure it looked like a long process. That's how people like him operate. They make their decisions, and then they backfill the story to make it seem earned." The truth of that sat heavy on my chest. Not because it was cruel, because it was calculated. "I gave 5 years," I said quietly. "I know. And I didn't ask for a crown. Just fairness." "I know," he said again. "And so do the people who matter." That part stuck with me. Because deep down, I wasn't angry about the title. I was angry that I'd been invisible in plain sight. Wesley finished his coffee and leaned back. "So, what are you going to do now?" I looked out the window. A woman walked by with her dog, scarf trailing behind her. The leaves had started to turn, soft yellows creeping into the green. "I don't know yet," I said. "I'm not ready to blow anything up. But I can't pretend like nothing happened." He nodded. "Good. Don't pretend." We sat there a little longer, talking about everything and nothing. And when I left, the air didn't feel quite as cold. But it still didn't feel like mine. By Monday morning, the party had already turned into something distant and unspoken. The office looked the same beige carpet, same burnt coffee smell lingering near the kitchen, but everything felt different. Quieter. Tighter. Elliot walked in like nothing had happened. I don't know why I expected anything else. That's who he was. controlled,
Smooth.
capable of walking through emotional fire without smelling of smoke. Tessa had a new title under her name in the internal newsletter: Team Lead, Strategic Accounts. She didn't make a big announcement. She didn't need to. Her nameplate changed. Her emails started ending with that extra line. That was enough. No one said anything outright, but I felt the shift in energy. It was like a shared discomfort no one wanted to name. Like watching a play where the main character gets swapped out mid-act and everyone just keeps performing like it's normal. On Wednesday, Harrison Capital had a situation. A press mention got twisted online, and by noon, 3 industry blogs had picked it up with headlines that made it sound worse than it was. Harrison was one of our legacy clients, demanding, high stakes, but loyal. Or at least they had been. Tessa froze in the client call. I don't say that out of spite. I watched it happen. Her voice went thin. She said she'd circle back 4 times in 15 minutes and kept glancing at Elliot's face on the conference screen like she was waiting for a lifeline that never came. When the call ended, Elliot looked at me. Maren, can you take lead on this? I already had my laptop open. I'd been jotting down timestamps and action points throughout the call. I nodded, not because I wanted to, but because the alternative was letting a client relationship fall apart for the sake of pride. Over the next 48 hours, I worked like I used to when I first started. I stayed past 7, called editors, pulled data, rewrote statements 3 times until the tone matched the brand. I didn't sleep well, but by Friday morning, the narrative had shifted. The blogs updated their coverage. Harrison thanked us. The crisis, for now, had passed. I didn't expect a parade. But I didn't expect what happened either. In the Monday stand-up, Elliot leaned against the edge of the table like he always did, one ankle crossed over the other, hands folded. Before we start, he said, I want to recognize some great initiative last week. I felt the air catch in my chest. Not hope, something more guarded than that. Tessa, he continued, you showed real poise under pressure. Managing client tensions isn't easy, and I think you handled it well. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. But inside, something buckled. Tessa nodded, eyes wide. Thanks. I learned a lot. Of course you did, I thought. I taught it to you. We moved on. The meeting continued. I took notes, as always.
No one said anything.
But as we left the room, one of my colleagues, Janelle, brushed past me and whispered low enough so only I could hear. That wasn't okay. 3 words.
Quiet.
Simple. But they landed hard. Not because they changed anything, but because they told me I wasn't crazy. That afternoon, I drafted a short internal memo. I labeled it Role Clarity and Team Contributions, Harrison Capital Recap. It wasn't petty, just a clean breakdown of what each person did. It included Tessa's initial briefing notes, Elliot's client comms sign-off, and the action list I executed from Thursday to Friday. I sent it to Elliot, just him, with a short message. Wanted to keep a record for transparency. Let me know if you'd like to discuss. The reply came fast. Don't turn this into a credit war. It makes you look insecure. That sentence did something to me. I don't know if it was the word war, or the way he assumed I had some childish need to be applauded. Maybe it was how quickly he flipped it, how fast he framed my professionalism as a weakness. I sat at my desk, staring at the message. My jaw clenched without meaning to. My hand hovered over the mouse. The office around me buzzed with small talk and keystrokes, but inside me, everything narrowed into silence. So this is how it's going to be, I thought. I closed the email. I didn't reply. There was nothing else to say. That night, I didn't stay late. I didn't check my inbox from home. I walked out exactly at 6. The sunset was just starting to spill orange across the buildings. I let it hit my face and didn't rush to my car. Somewhere deep down, I knew I was starting to count the days. It started with a glass of water. Not a meltdown. Not a slammed door. Just me, standing in my kitchen at 7:12 p.m., holding that glass like it had something to say. I didn't drink it right away. I just held it, both hands wrapped around it, elbows resting on the counter, eyes locked on the stainless steel sink like it might offer some kind of clarity. The apartment was still. The kind of stillness you only notice when something inside you isn't. The fridge hummed in the corner. The wall clock ticked like it always had. But that night, every sound felt louder, like the room was waiting for me to catch up with what I already knew. I had done everything right. Showed up early. Stayed late. Took the messy clients no one else wanted. Diffused tension in meetings with a sentence. Kept my head down when it would have been easier, maybe even fairer, to speak up. Everything reasonable. Everything expected. And I felt erased. I set the glass down without drinking and made my way to the bedroom. The overhead light felt too bright, so I flipped on the old lamp in the corner, the one with the crooked shade I never got around to fixing. I sat on the floor, cross-legged, and pulled my laptop from under the bed. There was a folder I hadn't opened in a while. I'd called it Growth. Kind of embarrassing now, in a way that makes your face heat up even though no one else can see it. It held thank you emails from clients, project recaps, little moments that had made me feel seen at least for a while. And then I found it. Subject: looking ahead. Sent 9 months ago. You're next, Maren. Timing is everything. Elliot. I read it 5 times. The words were short. Almost friendly. Almost. Back then, I'd taken that email as a signal, subtle, but sincere. Like a quiet nudge that said, I see you. Hang in there. I remembered showing it to a friend once, telling her it was coming, that I just had to be patient. Now, it read like a tactic. A well-worded leash. I leaned back against the wall, knees pulled up, laptop still warm in my lap. That voice echoed in my mind again, his voice. Don't turn this into a credit war. It makes you look insecure. It wasn't the words that hurt. It was the ease with which he said them. Like I should have been grateful just to still be in the room. That was the part one kept circling back to. Not the mistitle. Not the praise handed to someone else. But the way he assumed I'd stay quiet. Like I always had. I didn't cry. That surprised me. What I felt was quieter than anger. Heavier than sadness. Like I'd been sitting at the end of a long dinner table where everyone else got served, and I hadn't even realized I was holding the tray. That Sunday, I went back to Gracewood Chapel. I hadn't been in weeks. Not out of loss of faith, just fatigue. Sometimes even showing up to hope feels exhausting. The group was small. A few familiar faces. Wesley was there, nodding at me when I walked in but not making a fuss. We sat in a loose circle, folding chairs creaking every time someone shifted. The topic was restoration. Boundaries. How to protect the things God placed in you, especially when the world keeps trying to bend them out of shape. I didn't say much. I just listened. And near the end, when the room fell into a soft silence, I bowed my head, not out of formality, but from something deeper, like letting my spine rest after standing too straight for too long. I didn't speak aloud. I didn't need to. God, help me remember who I am, not who they say I am. It was simple.
And honest.
That was enough. Afterward, I lingered in the parking lot. Wesley leaned on the passenger side of his car, arms crossed, eyes soft under the fading orange light. You ever regret leaving? I asked. He thought for a moment, then nodded. Some days. But never for the reasons I thought I would. Like what? I thought I'd miss the role, the schedule, the influence. But what I actually miss is smaller. The inside jokes. The way a team clicks when they trust each other. But that's not the same thing as missing the system that didn't value me. I looked down at my shoes, the ones with the worn edges I'd been meaning to replace. I think I've been waiting for something that's never coming. He exhaled slowly. Waiting can look like faith on the outside. But inside, it can quietly become fear. Or worse, permission to settle. That line stuck with me. Later that night, back home, I sat at the kitchen table with the same glass of water, still full. I opened my laptop. Subject: notice of resignation. No dramatic language. No bitterness. Just clarity. Just enough to say, I see what happened. And I see myself again.
I didn't hit send. Not yet.
But I left the window open. And somehow, that felt like the first door I'd opened in a very long time. It came on a Thursday morning. Quiet, like most betrayals do. I was in the middle of replying to a client about a vendor delay, my fingers halfway through a sentence that started with "just circling back," when the Slack notification pinged in the corner of my screen. Letitia James. HR. We weren't friends. We weren't enemies either. We were polite coworkers, orbiting each other in the predictable rhythm of corporate formalities. So when her name popped up, my first instinct wasn't concern. Just curiosity. Her message was short. No greeting. No smiley face. "I thought you should see this. It's not right." Attached, a single file. I hesitated. My hand hovered over the trackpad. My breath caught in that quiet, internal way that tells you your body already knows something your mind hasn't accepted yet. I clicked. The file opened to a familiar template, an internal promotion memo, labeled Strategic Promotions, Q3 Recommendation. I'd seen documents like this before, years ago, when someone else's name had gone bold and mine had stayed quiet. I started reading. The first few lines were corporate air, phrases like forward-facing leadership initiatives and building continuity in strategic delivery. Language designed to say a lot without meaning much. But then my eyes caught something real. Edit history. It was still embedded in the PDF. Maybe they forgot to scrub it. Maybe they didn't know how. But there it was. Recommended candidate. Strategic Accounts Lead. Original. Maren Holloway. Strike through. Replaced by Tessa Rowe. Edited 6 days before the promotion party. 6 days. My name crossed out. Like a mistake. Like an inconvenience. I stared at the screen, and for a second, it all went quiet. Even the office noises, the tapping of keys, the buzz of the overhead lights, blurred into nothing. All I could hear was the soft whoosh of my breath and the sudden pounding of my heart, not in panic, just in confirmation. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't timing. It wasn't missed opportunity. He had erased me. Letitia messaged again. "I saw the changes in the system. I don't know who made the final call, but your name was there." I typed slowly, fingers tight on the keys. "Thank you for showing me." That's all I wrote. Anything more would have cracked the calm I was barely keeping together. I sat back in my chair. My office suddenly felt too small, walls leaning in, ceiling dipping low, the air too still. I placed both hands on the desk, as if steadying myself against something I couldn't name. And then came the memory. Elliot's voice, calm and rehearsed. "Let's keep our options open. Timing is everything. You've always been a steady presence." He hadn't just overlooked me. He had written me out of the story entirely. Not because I wasn't good enough, but because he thought I wouldn't do anything about it. Because I'd been predictable. Quiet. Useful. I opened the resignation letter I'd drafted days earlier. No edits needed. No additions. I hit print. The machine came alive with a low hum, and when the page slid out, the sound was crisp. Final. I held the sheet in both hands, plain white paper, bold black ink. My name printed at the top, a single line waiting at the bottom for my signature. I sat in silence. 5 years. 5 years of showing up. Of cleaning up behind others. Of carrying client accounts no one else wanted. Of being called the rock of the department like it was a compliment, when really it just meant, she won't break. I'd told myself to wait. To be professional. To trust the process. And here I was, strike through. I picked up my pen and signed. No second guessing. No shaky hand. It wasn't liberation I felt. Not yet. But something solid settled in my chest. A stillness. A certainty. Like hearing a door click shut behind you and knowing you'll never walk back through it. I slid the letter into a folder, sealed it, and placed it gently in my bag. Still Thursday. Still morning. The sky outside hadn't changed. The world went on unbothered. But everything in me had shifted. Because now, finally, I understood. This wasn't about not being chosen. It was about being deliberately removed. And I wasn't going to let that be the last word. I didn't check his calendar, didn't wait for a polite opening in his schedule, didn't ask his assistant if he was available for a quick chat. I just walked, steady, measured, down the hallway lined with glass and artificial calm, until I reached his door. The frosted panels still read Elliot Granger, Senior Director, etched in faux gold. I pushed it open and stepped in, letting it close softly behind me. The quiet click of the latch felt louder than I expected. Elliot looked up from his desk. His surprise registered as a blink, nothing more. He didn't flinch, didn't straighten up, didn't scramble to adjust his posture like someone caught off guard. Just that familiar tilt of the head and faint arch of the brow. Polite curiosity, expertly worn. "Maren," he said slowly, as if testing the air between us. "Something wrong?" I didn't answer. Not yet. I didn't sit either. I reached into my bag, pulled out the manila folder with my resignation letter, and placed it directly in front of him.
Calm.
Controlled. Like evidence on a courtroom bench. "This was sent to me anonymously," I said. "I thought it was worth confirming." He looked down at the folder, but didn't touch it. His eyes flicked back to mine, steadier now, like he'd slipped into the skin of a man who knew how to stay ahead of stories.
"I see," he said. "Short."
Neutral. I waited. For once, I let the silence be mine. "You made your choice," I said, voice even. "Now I'm making mine." A twitch pulled at his jaw, barely noticeable, but it was there. The smallest crack in a carefully manicured facade. A man not used to being confronted, and certainly not by someone like me. "Maren," he began again, his voice slipping into that smooth, coaxing register I'd heard him use with clients and executives alike. "You've always been a valuable part of this team. But I think you might be taking this too personally. You're letting emotions cloud your judgment." I felt my fingers curl slightly around the edge of my coat pocket. I almost laughed, but I didn't. "You think this is about feelings?" I asked, quiet but sharp. He leaned back, lacing his fingers together like a man preparing to deliver wisdom. "Look, I understand that this must be frustrating. But walking away from 5 years of progress over one moment of disappointment? That's not strength, Maren. That's self-sabotage." I stepped forward, not with threat, just with clarity. "This isn't about one moment. It's about the entire pattern you hoped I wouldn't notice. The compliments that came with conditions. The responsibilities without recognition. The promises you never intended to keep." I let the weight of the words sit between us. "You didn't just overlook me, Elliot. You erased me. And you expected me to say thank you for the opportunity to watch it happen." He stood up then, slowly, deliberately. I imagine he thought it gave him height control. His voice sharpened. "Do you really want to throw all this away for some wounded pride?" That's when I really looked at him. Not as my boss. Not as someone I once trusted. But as a man clinging to the illusion that he was still in charge of my narrative. "No," I said, my voice calm but unshakable. "I'm walking away to protect the one thing you can't rewrite, my integrity."
There was a flicker of something then.
Maybe disbelief. Maybe resentment. He scoffed an ugly little sound and said, "You'll regret this." And that's when I knew I'd already won. Not because I wounded him. Not because I had the last word. But because I'd taken back something he counted on keeping, my silence. I picked up the sealed envelope, the one I had already signed the night before, and placed it beside the folder. "If I regret anything," I said, "it'll be not leaving sooner." I turned and walked out. No grand exit. No slamming doors. Just footsteps on tile and a stillness that followed me like a closing curtain. I didn't say goodbye to anyone. I didn't stop by my desk to gather my things. What I needed to carry with me didn't live in drawers or desk organizers. The walk to the elevator felt longer than usual. Every step held the quiet release of 5 years I was no longer willing to explain away. I pressed the button, waited. The lights blinked. The hallway buzzed with office life behind me, none of it touching me anymore. As the elevator doors slid shut, I caught one last look at the floor I'd helped keep afloat without ever asking for applause. Rows of cubicles. Faces turned to monitors. Conversations that dipped low when real things started to rise. But for the first time, I didn't shrink. I saw my reflection in the steel panel across from me. Steady gaze. Relaxed shoulders. No crack in my voice. No tremble in my hands. I stepped out into the lobby, past the glass walls, and out onto the street. The city moved around me, cars honking, people pacing crosswalks, espresso machines steaming behind windows. But it was the first time in a long time I could actually hear myself again. And that voice said, "You did the right thing." It took exactly 28 days. Not that I was counting. But when you've spent 5 years measuring progress in deadlines and deliverables, some part of you always keeps track. 28 days since I handed in my resignation. Since I stood in Elliot's office and placed my integrity on his desk. Since I walked away without asking anyone's permission. The message came mid-morning, while I was still in my pajamas, sipping half-warm coffee on the couch with a TV playing softly in the background. Nothing dramatic. Just a buzz from my phone and a preview that made my stomach drop, not in fear, but in recognition. Janelle. Harrison Capital just pulled out. Total disaster. Seconds later, another. Tessa froze in the meeting. Elliot tried to cover, but it was bad. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering over the reply bubble, but I didn't type anything. I didn't need to. There was nothing I could say that wouldn't feel like salt in a wound she hadn't inflicted. I leaned back into the couch cushion, closed my eyes, and let the silence stretch. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. But I let myself feel the fullness of that moment, the quiet confirmation that I had been right to leave. The building I'd once worked so hard to hold together was cracking without me. Not because I was irreplaceable, but because I had been the one holding the seams without asking for credit. And now those seams were splitting. I hadn't heard from Janelle since I left. She wasn't the kind of person to make a scene or take sides out loud. She just watched, noticed. And the fact that she was texting me now, it meant the quiet people were finally done pretending. That afternoon, I opened my laptop to check some invoices for freelance consulting work I'd picked up. A new email appeared in my inbox, Letitia James. Subject line, "Thank you." I clicked. Maren. I just resigned too. Watching them ignore you is the last straw. I should have said something sooner. Hope you're doing better than we are. The last line wasn't what got me. It was the third one. I should have said something sooner. It landed hard, not in anger, but in understanding. Because I'd been her. I knew that feeling. That slow, quiet guilt that sneaks in after you've stayed silent too long. That's the thing about silence. People assume it means agreement or peace. But sometimes, silence is just fear. Or exhaustion. Or self-preservation disguised as professionalism. I stood and walked to the window. The afternoon light was starting to slant across the sidewalk, cutting shadows through the trees. A delivery driver hoisted a brown bag up the stairs across the street. 2 kids zipped by on scooters, shrieking with delight, untethered from whatever adult world surrounded them. Life kept going. Ordinary and indifferent. But something in the air felt shifted. Like the grip Brightwell had once held over my identity had finally let go. Later that week, I stopped by Gracewood Chapel. Not for a service. Not for a group. Just to sit. The pews were mostly empty, scattered with old hymnals and a few warm bodies who looked like they, too, had come more for stillness than structure. The sanctuary smelled of pine and old wood polish. The air felt thick with memory. I sat in the back row, pulled out my journal, flipped to a clean page, and wrote, carefully in the center, "Justice doesn't always need to shout. Sometimes it just walks out the door." I read the words back to myself, not because I needed reassurance, but because they felt like closure. I didn't need Elliot to apologize. I didn't need the company to implode. I didn't need anything really but this, a quiet knowing that I had done the right thing, even when it was hard. That evening my phone rang. Wesley. His voice, when I answered, was as grounded as ever.
"Hey," he said.
"Got a minute?" "Always." "We've been talking internally at Thornbell," he continued. "We're growing faster than expected. I don't want to train someone to pretend they know what leadership looks like. I want someone who already walks in it." I didn't say anything. "We'd like to bring you in. Strategy director. You'd have actual decision-making power. Full seat at the table. No sales pitch. No dangling carrots. Just facts." And, he added, We've been watching how you carry yourself. That's what leadership looks like to us. I walked to the window again.
Same view.
Same street. But it looked different. You don't have to answer now, he said. I know, I replied. I just thank you.
He paused.
You didn't need to hear it, Maren. You already knew. You just needed someone else to say it out loud. When we hung up, I didn't grab a notebook. I didn't make a pros and cons list. I didn't pace the kitchen or seek out advice. I just sat in the quiet. And for the first time in years, that quiet didn't feel like absence. It felt like peace. The clapping had stopped. But I'd finally remembered how to listen to my own applause. The first thing I noticed about Thornbell wasn't the office space. It was the silence. A different kind of silence than what I'd known before. It wasn't the tense, cautious kind that filled a room when people were waiting to be told who mattered. This silence felt clear, uncluttered, like the kind you get after a deep breath. The office itself was smaller than Brightwell. Open floor plan, no glassed-in egos. Natural light spilled in through oversized windows, and there were more plants than power suits. People spoke to each other like they were on the same side, not silently measuring who'd get blamed when something went sideways. Wesley introduced me to the team on my first day. No big announcement. No performative smiles. Just a simple walkthrough, a few genuine handshakes, and then this one sentence, spoken without flair. She's not here because she needs us. She's here because we need her. It landed harder than any speech Elliot had ever rehearsed. Over the next few weeks, I settled in, not just into the role, but into myself again. My mornings weren't spent strategizing how to navigate unspoken landmines. I had real input, real authority. I was trusted to own decisions and expected to stand by them. One afternoon, a new hire, early 20s, eager, still finding her footing, asked me during lunch, "How did you know it was time to leave?" I didn't have to think long. When staying meant I'd have to forget who I was. She didn't say anything right away, just nodded, like maybe she felt the edges of that truth already. News about Brightwell filtered in gradually. An old colleague forwarded me a link to a trade blog, just a quiet paragraph about internal leadership audits. A few days later, I heard from Letitia again. Elliot's been asked to step down temporarily. Official line is strategic review, but everybody knows. And then, a final email from Tessa. It was part of a farewell thread that somehow found its way to my inbox. I wasn't ready. I should have spoken up more. I just wanted to say thank you for how you handled everything. I didn't feel angry reading it. I didn't feel vindicated either. I felt calm. Tessa wasn't the villain. She was the symptom. A younger version of me, maybe, if I'd been hungrier for approval and quieter about doubt. That Friday, I found myself at Maple Oak again. Same table by the window. Same subtle smell of cinnamon and espresso. I hadn't been there in weeks. Not since the day after the announcement. I ordered a small latte and opened my laptop. Among the emails was one from a conference organizer. Subject: Invitation to Speak, Fall Leadership Forum. Title: Rebuilding Trust, What Leadership Really Means. I stared at it for a moment, smiled, and flagged it to answer later. I wasn't in a rush to say yes to anything anymore. That was part of the healing, too, knowing I had nothing to prove, no one to chase. I opened my notebook, the one I'd brought with me that day at the chapel, and flipped to the back page. Wrote slowly, like I needed each word to land in the right place. I didn't leave empty-handed. I took back my voice, my worth, and my time. And no, I didn't lose anything. That was mine to begin with. When I finally stepped out of the cafe, the sky had turned a soft, forgiving gray. Rain was just starting to fall, light and steady. I didn't pull out my umbrella. I let the drops land on my coat, cool on my face, soft on my shoulders. The sidewalk glistened under the glow of the street lamps. The world moved on around me. No applause, no recognition. But for the first time in years, I didn't need anyone to notice. I knew who I was. And that was enough. Sometimes, it's not the loud endings that stay with us. It's the quiet decisions we make just to remember who we are. Maybe you've been there too. in a room where you gave your best and still became invisible. If this story touched something in you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you'd like to walk with me through more stories like this, I hope you'll stay close for the next one.